Toni, and I'm here to talk about all the books that I read in September and the books I'm planning on reading in October, which you guys know is my favorite time of the year, so I'm really excited. So in September, I had like a really big reading slump, and I know I read like 9 books still, but I feel like in booktube culture, that's not a lot, but I don't care. Like, it's fine. It happens to everyone. Some days you just gotta listen to the Dear Evan Hansen soundtrack 8 times in a row and watch an episode of Gilmore Girls you've watched a million times before. It's fine. Like, I'm really happy with what I read. Unfortunately, the slump hit me as I was doing a buddy read with Acacia Ives, and we were reading Geek Love, and I just couldn't bring myself to read anything. And then that even stretched out into audiobooks. Like, I didn't even want to listen to any books. So I wish it hadn't happened then, because that's a book I was really excited about. But, you know, this stuff happens. I own it. I can read it anytime. So anyway, the first book I read this month was Gangsterland by Tod Goldberg. If you don't know, Tod Goldberg is one of the hosts of one of my favorite bookish podcasts, Literary Disco. And this book was really interesting because it's a little different than what I usually read. If I could say, like, the tone of it is like if you take Breaking Bad and you put like a little bit of Face Off in it. Yes, that Face Off. And sprinkle in a little Judaism. And I know, it sounds weird. The plot is that our main character, Saul, is like this big time hitman with the Chicago mob. Until like there's like a botched operation that leaves 3 dead undercover FBI agents. So he gets moved to Las Vegas. And when he gets moved to Las Vegas, he gets a few minor like facial reconstruction surgeries, just like elongating his jaw a little bit. And he has to go through all this training and study to assume the identity they give him is that of Rabbi David Cohen. So it's really interesting because he still is doing like some work, like he's working for the like Las Vegas arm of the mob now. It's really interesting because, you know, our character changes names and changes identities partway through the book, and it's interesting to see, because it's written from his perspective, how his rabbinical training kind of seeps into his decision making, and it kind of starts to affect his worldview, and he starts to question things kind of through that lens, which was really interesting. But still had the grittiness that I want from a, you know, mafia mob type story. So I really recommend it. Like I said, super gritty, a little violent. So you just need to know that going into it. I heard on Guernsey's podcast, Read or Dead, that this did get picked up for an adaptation because we are living in the golden age of adaptations, apparently. So that'll be really exciting if that's true. The next book I picked up, I read on my e-reader. That was Follow You Home by Mark Edwards. So this was a thriller. This is about a British couple, and they're traveling through Eastern Europe, and just a traveler's worst nightmare happens to them. They lose their passports, like their stuff gets stolen, like all their electronics. They get thrown off of a train, like physically thrown off, like in the middle of nowhere in Romania. Like, I'm sorry, this book was just like so crazy and unbelievable. And just they run into something, they witness something, and of course that thing ends up following them home. And this was just so unbelievable. Like, I couldn't get into the story because of how crazy it was, that I almost would have preferred if it had been supernatural. Like, something happened to them, and just like, and you know, like when they come home, they can't put their finger on it, but like the essence of that thing is everywhere, and they're like paranoid about it. I think I would have preferred that story than just like the ridiculous thing that they stumble upon that like starts hunting them down. It was just, I don't know, not my kind of story. I gave it 2 stars. Like, the writing was good, and it was very fast-paced, but I just could not get my head around how crazy it was. I'm sorry. The next book I read was The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison. Russell at Ink and Paper blog said this was Toni Morrison's most approachable work. I read Beloved last year, and it definitely takes some work. Like, you have to be paying attention, and there are parts where I would question like what was going on. So I kind of had a little bit of issues with this one just because of the storytelling. It was a little disjointed, and it's about a girl named Pecola, but it's never from her perspective. It's from other people's perspectives, and I really enjoyed it. Toni Morrison is an amazing writer. Like, her words are just pure poetry, and I could highlight this whole book just even while she's describing something like a grass on the sidewalk. Just the words she uses are so beautiful, and she is talented. I really wanted to like this story like a little bit more. Like, I thought it was a great story. I thought it was just a little hard to follow, a little disjointed, but absolutely beautiful. The next book I read was The Grip of It by Jac Jemc. This is a haunted house story. This is about a couple. They're having issues. They buy a house in the country, and that house just starts to have a lot of problems. There's weird spaces, there's mold on the wall, and then those problems kind of start to affect them. Like, they are suddenly waking up with bruises, they black out and start losing time, like they don't know what happened, and they just have this weird neighbor, and they get caught up in a bigger story. As a haunted house story, it was fairly interesting, but I think what was more interesting about it was the literary aspect of it. Like, I would say this is kind of Fates and Furies meets House of Leaves. Like, it's about a house, but I feel like it was more about their marriage and their relationship. Every other chapter switched perspectives. Like, one chapter was from the wife's perspective and one chapter was from the husband's perspective. I really wouldn't say this book was scary in any way, but I really enjoyed it. I thought it was really written well, and I liked the look into their relationship kind of through this lens. The next book I read is Daughter of Fortune by Isabel Allende. This had been on my shelf forever. This was a buddy read I did with Sarai at Sarai Talks Books, and this is about a girl who was raised in Chile by a wealthy family, and she falls in love and chases her lover to Gold Rush era California in search of him. There was so much about this book that I liked. I love Isabel Allende's writing. I loved her characters in the beginning. She just has this way of making even side characters absolutely fascinating, where I just loved their story, and she would just hint at little things at their backstory, and, you know, we were just hooked in. We wanted to know more about these people. Unfortunately, halfway through this book, about the time that our main character Eliza makes it to California, I feel like I can tell that Isabel Allende got really into a rabbit hole in her research. I felt like the writing got a little like didactic a little bit, and she was just giving us facts about this legend up there, and she kind of lost the main thread of the story that was reeling us in, and I didn't find the ending really satisfying, so unfortunately it was a little disappointing. But it's definitely a solid like 3-star read for me, just because she was a great writer, and I was really hooked into the story for a long time, you know, until she got distracted on that rabbit trail. But overall enjoyable. I'm definitely going to keep reading Isabel Allende. The next book I read was The Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society by Marianne Shafer and Annie Barrows. This I did as an audiobook, which was really good. This is written in an epistolary format about this woman who wants to write this story about the people on this island during World War II while it was occupied by Nazis, and it's just this cast of really interesting characters, and of course it's a book about books and like this literary club and how all of these books affected each person differently. It was very sweet and very heartwarming, and I know this is getting adapted into a movie, and it's just going to be called Guernsey, I think is what I heard. I'll definitely go see it. It's definitely like my sister's type of thing, so I'll be watching it. I'm really excited. Like, it'll definitely be like a cute thing to watch. It was definitely like this cast of characters that were all so adorably quirky in their own way, and I actually haven't read a lot of books about books. As a reader, that was really fun to read about, you know, books affecting people in their own different way and their different points of life, and I really enjoyed it. This was a very enjoyable book. The next book I listened to was Hex by Thomas Olde Heuvelt. Thomas Olde Heuvelt. I have no idea if I'm pronouncing that right. He translated it from Danish into English himself. And this is a kind of horror novel about a town called Black Spring that's hiding this 300-year-old curse, like they're cursed by this witch, and about the young people in this town that are really trying to get together and finally do something about this, not just try to live their lives around this curse. Like, they want to do something about it. I loved this book. It was really interesting, and I feel like it gives me everything I want out of a horror novel. Like, it did have creepy elements. It took a trope and added its own twist to it. It modernized it. It added its own little spin to it, and it had really great commentary about society and about witch hunts and about the differences between generations and do people ever learn. Just, I loved the role that technology plays in this story and just the contrast between old and new. It was really, really great. And I think for that, it might actually find its spot along my top 10 horror novels for sure. And the last book that I read this month was The Magpie Murders by Anthony Horowitz, which was so fun. This is kind of a nod to those don't know if they're golden age mystery, golden era, I don't know what you would say, but you know, like the Agatha Christie and the Dorothy Sayers type stories where it's not quite a locked room mystery, but all the suspects are within a small town. And this book was great because it was a book within a book. So the first chunk of the book that you're reading is this fictional story by this author, and it's his last book that he's ever going to write in this mystery series, and it's missing its final chapter. And then that author, you know, mysteriously commits suicide. And so the second chunk of the book is the editor trying to figure out what happened and trying to figure out who has a motive, and just the two stories complement each other so perfectly. It was just so fun. So if you like those type of stories, this is fantastic, and I definitely recommend it if you're like an Agatha Christie fan, because it was just so great. So I felt, even with the slump, that I had a really, really good reading month, and I'm really happy about it. So I'm not going to push myself too hard for October as far as TBR expectations, even though that is really fun to just get a stack of books I say I'm going to read. This is like the bare minimum of what I do plan on doing. So the first book I plan on rereading is Dracula by Bram Stoker. I found a great audiobook version that Liz is letting me use that's, I think, narrated by like Tim Curry. So I'm really excited about that. Like I've mentioned, this is one of my all-time favorites, and I haven't revisited it for a long time. So I'm really excited to do it this year. The next book I'm planning on reading is The Seance by John Harwood. This is the October pick for the Dying to Read book club that April at Getting Hygge with It is hosting. And this is kind of a Victorian ghost story about this girl, and her mother is really sad because the girl's sister has died. And so to cheer her mom up, she decides to do a seance. Unfortunately, there are really big consequences to the seance, and I don't think she gets the results that she wanted. And I know that there's big creepy houses and ghosts, so I'm really excited to get into this and discuss it with the whole group. It's always really fun. And then I also plan on reading my first John Saul book. This is Punish the Sinners. I saw that Josh at Literary Gladiators and Julie at A Girl in a Book, I think Buddy read this one. I know Buddy read one John Saul book. It might have been this one. But this is about a curse from Italy in like the 13th century that's coming back to this boarding school, and it starts attacking the girls, and there's a teacher and he's kind of trying to figure out what's going on, because I'm guessing this curse has really violent consequences. And they both really enjoyed it, and you know, he's a very well revered author in the horror community that I've never read. So I'm really looking forward to this, and I do have other books by him if I really enjoy this that I can move on to, which is really exciting. The last thing I am definitely planning on doing this month is reading Stephen King's Misery. I have a real hit or miss relationship with Stephen King, but I know his earlier stuff for me works best, and I think this has all the elements of a Stephen King novel that works really well for me, which is all the horror being within a small confined space with not a lot of characters in a very controlled setting. I feel like is great to really build tension. I've never watched the movie Misery. I'm obviously like aware of the plot. I'm aware culturally, because of pop culture, of kind of the plot, but I don't really know all the details. So I'll be really interested to go into this. It's not that long, which is another Stephen King complaint that I have. So I'm really excited. This is one I've been wanting to get to for a long time, so I'm hoping it meets my expectations and goes on like my thumbs up Stephen King list. Anyway guys, those are the books I read in September and the books I'm planning to read in October. Let me know if you have any thoughts on any of the books I've mentioned, or let me know what you're planning to read in October. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you again soon. Bye!